All right, yeah, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Super excited for today's Lunch and Learn and to get things going. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Elise Ackerman Castleberry, City Manager in Delta. Very excited to have Miranda Fisher be our guest today. Before I turn things over to her, I do want to start off with just a couple of things. First and foremost, thank you to City and County of Broomfield, to Curtis, who is assisting us with all of the technical pieces of this, and also to Jennifer Huffman for making all of their resources available to us, not just today, but frequently. Always appreciate the assistance that she provides to us. Thank you to CCCMA, who is our parent organization, Colorado City County Managers Association. This event is sponsored by Colorado Women Leading Government. And also thank you to our team as part of CWLG. Over this last year, we have been able to host 4 events. This is our final event of the year, and we look forward to bringing some additional events to you next year. So please stay tuned to your email and the newsletter and other information that Marianne, who is our fearless leader at CCCMA, puts out to communicate what we are up to and what we're doing, as well as the other groups within CCCMA. Couple quick instructions for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Miranda. Please make sure at the end of the presentation, we're going to upgrade everybody to panelists, so you'll be able to ask questions. When that happens, please make sure your mics are off. Right now, because we're in presentation mode, I don't think you can talk to us via or talk even amongst yourselves with mics. So I don't think that'll be an issue for a moment. Miranda has some great resource material. We're going to send that out to everybody that is registered and put it up on the CCCMA website. So you'll be able to access that information. It is Miranda's dissertation, which is what she's going to be presenting to us today. And we'll talk about that more in just a moment. Please, well, you won't be able to ask questions because we're at presentation mode, so I can leave that part of my introduction off. But after we are done with the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A session, and I will call on hands. So if you'll raise your hand on the presentation, I will start calling on people to ask questions throughout the last part of our program here. So with that, I'm going to do a quick introduction of Miranda. So Miranda Fisher is town manager at Camp Verde in Arizona and has been serving in this role for 5 months now. Prior to moving to Camp Verde, she served as the town administrator for the town of Nederland, where she grew up. Miranda joined Nederland as town clerk in August 2019 and was quickly promoted to deputy town administrator, town clerk within 6 months. By June of 2021, she was appointed town and zoning administrator and served in that role just shy of 3 years. Miranda holds a master's degree and doctorate in public administration, along with graduate certificates in public sector human resources and criminal justice. In March of 23, Miranda successfully defended her doctoral dissertation titled Motivation to Break Through Occupational Barriers, a case study of female city managers' career progression, which is what she'll be reviewing with us today. I'm very excited for this presentation. Miranda has previewed some of this data with CWLG earlier this year, and it was really fascinating and interesting. We asked her if she'd come back and share this with all of us, and look forward to the presentation. So with that, Miranda, I am going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yep.
I really appreciate it. Happy to be with you all. Miss Colorado, but nice to be with you virtually. As Lisa mentioned, I want to walk you through my dissertation, which I titled Motivation to Break Through Occupational Barriers, a case study of female city managers' career progression. So today, just a little bit of what we're going to do, just want to tell you a little bit more about myself and really my journey to get to my doctoral dissertation. I'm going to dive into my dissertation itself, which will include a summary of the literature review, a framework of my study, and then ultimately the findings, which I think are the most exciting part. We'd love to open it up for questions, and then if time allows, do a little bit of participant discussion on ways we can continue to advance women serving in the city manager role. So a little bit about me, as Lise mentioned, Miranda Fisher, currently serving as the town manager of Camp Verde. Camp Verde is a community of 13,000, just located 20 minutes south of Sedona. And prior to coming here, I was in Nederland, which is my hometown. What's unique about my career, though, is working in local government is really a second career of sorts for me. I spent the first 10 years after my bachelor's degree working in the health and human services industry. Specifically, I worked with individuals with disabilities, the aging population, people struggling with addiction, as well as people experiencing homelessness, both in Colorado, as well as Las Vegas, Nevada, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. And really, while I deeply care about all of those individuals and those who need the most assistance, I realize that doing that work is relatively siloed, and I wanted an opportunity to support the community on a larger scale and feel like through local government, as you all know, there really is that opportunity to do so. So that's what motivated me to go back for my master's in public administration. After receiving that through Penn State, I was living in Las Vegas at the time, trying to get into some leadership roles there, and really wasn't successful in doing so, unfortunately. So when that town clerk job opened up in Nederland, I thought, what better place than my hometown to go serve in this role and be able to get started in municipal government. So I got the opportunity to serve as town clerk, deputy town administrator, town administrator. Ultimately, my decision to move and come here to Camp Verde was really driven by my desire to grow as a manager. I think you all know that in order to grow as a manager, you have to often transition to different communities of different sizes or whatever it might be that you're looking for. I started my bachelor's degree in Flagstaff at Northern Arizona University, which is an hour north of Camp Verde. So I was very familiar with the area and also really intrigued by this community, its intentions to grow, and its need for stabilization. What I love most about being here, though, is I've really been able to apply a lot of what I've learned through my doctoral journey in this dissertation to my job here. Camp Verde, in a period of 18 months, went through 5 managers between kind of permanent hires and interim. So I came into an organization that was experiencing some instability, and a lot of who I am as a leader, and specifically as a female leader, I think has led to some of the successes we've seen since I've been here. So first things first, this dissertation is focused entirely on the field of city management, which means understanding what city management is really step one. It's important to note that when I worked on this dissertation, it was 2002 to 2003. So while there is some data in here, it may be considered stale in some regards. I think that the findings still hold true, even if the qualitative data itself is different. When preparing slides, I found this really cool image that you see before you, and I thought that's a great description or entirely accurate of what is city management today. It's one image that tells it all. However, to expand on that further, city managers are essential to local government because they help to navigate the political dichotomy by promoting democratic accountability, upholding ethical and fair standards, and enhancing municipal departments' effectiveness, efficiency, and legitimacy. City managers are often referred to as leaders in the shadows, and there's actually a few books about this, because so much of what city managers do is not seen by the public. The role of city manager is imperative, though, to a jurisdiction's success. However, it is a vocational field that is occupationally segregated by gender. You may have heard this statistic before, but according to data compiled by the International City and County Management Association Career and Equity Advancement Team, in 2001, 19% of city managers were women. And although that's an increase from the 1.3% in 1974, its continued low percentage does mean that this role is considered to be a male-dominated occupation. And therefore, there is occupational segregation in place. Occupational segregation occurs when a particular demographic is under or overrepresented within a specific vocational field. These fields are often referred to as non-traditional, where less than 25% of individuals are of a different demographic. So over the years, a lot of researchers have really looked into what are the barriers related to leaders, female leaders, and their lack of career progression. However, in my studies, I realized that there's a lot of limited research into what motivates women to want to combat the occupational barriers that exist. Therefore, in my specific study, I seek to investigate, analyze, and interpret the findings obtained from interviews with female city managers to assess the occupational barriers these women had to face, as well as the motivations and characteristics they possess that aided in their career progression. So going into my study, have to have research questions, and I landed on these 6 research questions. The first is, how do women perceive gender as a factor in career progression? The second, what occupational barriers have women had to overcome during their career progression? Third, what is the relationship between occupational barriers and career progression for women working in local government? Fourth, how do women describe their experience working in the male-dominated field of city management? Fifth, what are female city managers' motivational triggers that provide them with the fortitude to pursue career advancements in a male-dominated occupation? And finally, what are the characteristics of female city managers that aided in their career progression into the city manager role? So going into a dissertation, and a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between a dissertation, a doctoral degree, that's what I have, a doctorate in public administration, and a PhD. A doctorate means that you're using a theoretical framework that already exists to analyze your data and do your study, where a PhD is creating a new theoretical framework. So for me, I did a theoretical framework where I focus on the 4 that are before you. But I took an interesting journey to get here. Originally, when I was going into my dissertation, I was focused just on motivational theory and role congruency theory. However, my chair at the time really suggested that I needed to look into leadership theory, and I was adamantly against it. I just didn't want to do it. I didn't see the fit. I was really just focused on, the female perspective and motivation, and didn't want to tie in leadership. I thought it would complicate my research. However, when I was working on my findings, I really noted that the need to identify a leadership theory could help to evaluate those leadership characteristics that women have, and having that intertwining of role congruency in leadership theory. So that's why before you there are 4. And I just want to highlight those 4 really quick, just to provide kind of an overview of what they are. The first theory is motivational theory, which provides insight into what drives a person to pursue specific goals and what characteristics give them the tenacity to succeed in their endeavors. The second is trait theory of leadership, which suggests that there are certain personality traits a person has that makes them an effective leader. Third is the behavioral theory of leadership, which identifies that there are certain behaviors that a leader demonstrates related to tasks and employees that make them successful. And the fourth is role congruency theory, which explains the intersection between the traits typically associated with leaders and the shared beliefs regarding gender roles that men and women are supposed to adhere to. So from this theoretical framework, I then dove into a literature review. That literature review took approximately 10 months to go through all of the literature to a point of saturation in which I fully studied each one of these theories. So I'm just going to dive into those pretty quickly here. The first is the motivational theory. We all know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's kind of what gets this started. There are 5 components to the hierarchy of need. The pyramid includes physiological, safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And Maslow really argued that individuals' basic needs are met. As they're met, they become motivated to reach self-actualization, where a person realizes their potentialities for continued self-improvement and development, and the desire to become more and more of what one is and what one is capable of becoming. The second theorist under motivational theory is Frederick Herzberg, who studied why employees were satisfied or dissatisfied at work. What he did is he broke it down into 2 factors. There's a hygiene factor and a motivation factor. Hygiene issues really don't motivate employees, but they can help to address any dissatisfaction that might be in place. And that includes working conditions, policies and procedures, and compensation. Herzberg really identified, though, that what motivates employees are things that fulfill the individual's need for meaningful growth, such as recognition, upward mobility within the organization, and just the work overall itself. David McLeland identified that people are motivated by three needs. There's power, affiliation, and achievement. McLeland explained that there are high and low achievers, and what category a person falls into is directly related on how they approach these three needs. So, for example, the need for power manifests in the person's influence and control over others. The need for affiliation, though, is having good collaborative relationships with others. And the need for achievement emphasizes accomplishing tasks and demonstrating high performance. Like McLeland, Victor Vroom also had three factors that impact motivation, but his were quite different. There was valence, expectancy, and instrumentality. Specifically, what Vroom said is that individuals' motivation is affected by how much they value reward associated with an action, which is that valence piece, how much they believe that putting effort into something will be able to generate good results, which is the expectancy, and how much they believe that generating good results will result in a reward, which is the instrumentality. I think you can see by just the photos alone, we've got these kind of original theorists who have truly paved way for one of the newest motivational theories, and you've probably read her book maybe. It's the grit theory, where Angela Duckworth really studied why some people fail and some people succeed. What Duckworth identified was that grit consists of a combination of talent and achievement, and that skill, talent, effort, and achievement are only possible if there's interest, passion, practice, and hope, which are all components of grit. The trait theory of leadership is maybe one of those that's perhaps a bit more controversial at times. It's really that theory that leaders are born, kind of comes from the great man theory that was formed in 1866 by Thomas Carlyle, who under that theory really rested on the notion that leaders were born and that they had specific traits that made them effective leaders, and that one's ability to lead is an inheritable characteristic. Again, I think while the validity of the great man theory has been questioned over the years, it paved way for other leadership theories, such as trait theory of leadership, which does suggest that a person's personality traits makes them an effective leader. And I'm sure you've read many books in your time that list, here are the top characteristics of an effective leader. And so Peter Northouse really studied all of those books and brought together a list of 5 characteristics that he believes appear consistently in different studies about effective leadership. And that was intelligence, self-confidence, determination, integrity, and sociability. So while trait theory of leadership continues on that assumption that leaders are born and not made, behavioral theory of leadership identifies that leadership skills can in fact be developed, and that how a person behaves is more of a significant indicator of how effective they will be in leadership. So although there's many behavioral theories of leadership, I really focus on 2. The first one is this Likert management system. So after conducting a survey of over 200 managers, Likert noted that there are 2 different types of leaders. There's a job-centered leader who's really focused on getting the task done. And then there's the employee-centered leader who's focused on ensuring that employees are successful and have the tools they need to complete their job. Depending on which one you prioritize more, you would end up in one of the following. You've got the expletive authoritative, which is the leader who imposes decisions on subordinates and uses fear to achieve employee motivation. Benevolent authoritative, where the leader uses reward to encourage productivity, but management is responsible for all decisions and there is no teamwork. Consultative, where the leader listens to subordinates and incorporates some of their ideas, but most subordinates do not feel responsible for the organization's goals. And then participative, where the leader engages subordinates, solves problems with the team, and everyone feels responsible for achieving the organization's goals. The other model that I looked at was Blake and Mooten's management grid. Blake and Mooten really expanded off of Likert's model in the 1990s when they developed a managerial grid system, which is featured here. Under this model, they identified 5 ways in which a manager acts. And depending on their style, there may be a varying production level as well as concern for people, which means a manager would fall into one of these 5 categories. versus authority compliance, where the leader has a high concern for production, low concern for people. The emphasis is on getting the work done at the expense of building good relationships. You have a country club manager who is the person who has high concern for people and low concern for production. It's a good working environment, but getting tasks done is pretty secondary. The impoverished manager is a leader that has low concern for people and production. They're very hands-off in their attitude, and there's minimal effort in building relationships or getting tasks completed. There's the middle of the road manager. This leader has a middle concern for production and people. There's a moderate effort to accomplish tasks and creating a good working environment. However, the results are not optimum. This is often referred to as your jack of all trades, master of none type leader. And then last, you've got team management, who is a leader who has high concern for people and production. It's a very good working environment, wonderful relationships between leaders and employees, and there still is a focus on getting things done and achieving organizational goals. This could be termed as jack of all trades, master of all approaches. The last theory that I mentioned is that role congruency theory. While researching gender leadership characteristics, I came across this theory, which I was very intrigued by, that explains how stereotypes associated with gender leadership characteristics may impact how women are perceived as leaders. Under this theory, it really notes that women are more apt to demonstrate communal behaviors, which are those really caring about the welfare of others, such as being nice and nurturing and compassionate. Where men, on the other hand, exhibit agentic behaviors, which are more controlling, such as dominant, competitive, assertive. And from here, you have gender roles are really broken down into descriptive norms, which is how men and women behave, as well as injunctive norms, which is how men and women should behave or are expected to behave. Therefore, when someone violates the standards for their gender, they're likely to be viewed unfavorably because their behaviors are incompatible with the expected behaviors. This is referred to counter-normative behavior, which results in women being limited in choices between either conforming to their gender norms or potentially being not being viewed as a leader, or exhibiting more of those agentic behaviors, male-based behaviors, and being prepared to face any backlash that might come with that. So obviously, my research talks about occupational barriers. Of course, we were going to research occupational barriers. So there are really 5 that I focus on in my literature review that I've outlined here. So first, patriarchy. We all know what that is, and that it reinforces gender bias, which can directly impact career advancement because women are evaluated based on their gender rather than their leadership qualities and characteristics. This can often result in women being viewed as inferior to their male counterparts. If selected for leadership roles, it's likely that a woman may feel isolated from the good old boys network, or they may experience hostile sexism, especially if men feel women are threatening their jobs. I think we've all, of course, heard of the glass ceilings, which are constructed so that women are removed from current vocational opportunities because of gender stereotypes or misperception that certain characteristics help a person move up in their career and women do not possess those. Glass walls might be one that not many people have heard of, where unlike glass ceilings, glass walls do allow for advancement, but only within specific departments. Under the glass wall effect, women are more likely to end up in dead-end careers or positions with less authority because they're kind of stuck. Glass cliff was actually a new one for me. I hadn't heard. When I was conducting my research, I came across a quote by D. Hart Davis and a few other authors that said, "Even the women who do manage to break the ceiling, ride the escalator, scale the walls, and navigate the labyrinth continue to face challenges once they arrive at the top. And that next barrier is this glass cliff. Often when many organizations are in crisis, they may seek to hire a woman to serve in an executive level position because they need that feminine leadership to bring about perhaps some healing. It's referred to this as think crisis, think female effect." So while it's admirable to step into those roles, and I'm in one right now, there is a pressure to succeed. And it's a risk. There's a pressure to succeed is the risk when an organization is in flux. If a female leader can overcome the pressure, they're then the hero. However, if they don't, their leadership is more apt to be scrutinized and their reputation damaged, as well as the bias that women are ineffective leaders is continued and confirmed. And in many of these studies, there was conversations about how after a female is unsuccessful, they'll bring back a male leader, and that kind of reinforces that men need to be in charge. There's also this second generation bias. So while those 4 occupational barriers I just noted are really overt, there is this bias that's just not so deliberate in the actions. It's really excluding women from the workplace culture and excluding them from advancing their careers. It's often referred to as that something's in the water feeling, where cultural assumptions and organizational structures create an environment where men are favored over women and women are disadvantaged. In addition, I also wanted to focus my literature review on the lived experience of female city managers. There are a lot of great articles out there written about managers, by managers, interviews with managers. So I just dove into those, and it really revealed that visibility, mentorship, representative bureaucracy, and policy changes are all essential for advancing women in the city manager role. So visibility, with that slow integration of women into city manager role, many female city managers have really shared that they feel like the outsider or that they're on display, especially when you walk into a room and you're the only woman in that room. And it's also being talked about as this double-edged sword of visibility. Being visible, being out there is appropriate because it allows a female city manager to position herself as the organizational leader. However, that visibility also increases the likelihood that women are subject to stereotypes where their every move is being scrutinized, and they must work that much harder to prove that they're an effective manager serving in the role. Mentorship in municipal government, there's really a lack of defined path, which continues that labyrinth where women have to navigate their own career paths with minimal guidance on the best course to move forward. Therefore, mentorship really plays a significant role in women progressing into the leadership position because mentors can provide advice, help with networking, and increase self-confidence, which can often be a barrier for women seeking career advancement. Representative bureaucracy, I'm sure you've all heard about that, but of course you want to see that there's a representation of those working in government to the population. And when we look at that from a female representation in the city manager role, I think there's an acknowledgement that there is a need for that. So representative bureaucracy is a pillar of public administration. It consists of both active and passive representation. Passive representation occurs when representatives demographically mirror their constituency. However, active representation is when those representatives are making decisions that directly impact the demographic in which they identify with. So, for example, it's women, female leaders advancing the interests of women. So last, I really looked at equal opportunity policies, procedures, and laws, including affirmative action, which is one of the most prominent legislative acts today that seeks to ensure diversity in the workplace. However, I think it's important to note that for affirmative action to truly be successful, organizations have to commit to advancing women into leadership positions, even if women have never held the role before, and by making changes to their recruitment, onboarding, compensation, and promotional programs. So that's the literature review. As I shared, it was just shy of a year of just nonstop reading. And so now, once that was completed, it was time to determine how was I going to design my research? What was my methodology going to be? And ultimately, I landed on a qualitative case study analysis. By using a narrative-based case study analysis, what I was able to do is understand the lived experiences of the female city managers I interviewed, and then in turn, be able to explain what characteristics these women possessed that aided in obtaining and maintaining the highest non-elected municipal government leadership position. So a little bit about my sample size. I was living in Colorado at the time, and so was lucky enough to meet with Colorado managers. But I focused specifically, of course, on the state because not only did I live there, but at the time in Colorado, 65 of female city managers out of 185 in the position, which meant that, of course, there was a larger population from which I could choose from. Just to put that in context, if you look at maybe more southern states, it's only 1 or 2% of managers are women. So that sample size would have been challenging. So I really wanted to not only focus on my own state, where I lived and I worked, but I needed the sample size to make this work. That sample size also allows me to reach a point of saturation. As with any research, you want to make sure you get to a point where the data collected really begins to mirror itself and there are repetitive statements made so that you know you've reached a point of saturation. To ensure that the female city managers I worked with had enough experience working in municipal government, I decided to use the International City and County Management Association's credentialing criteria of at least a minimum of 7 years in the field. While the women I interviewed weren't necessarily all credentialed managers, this criteria really helped to ensure that those interviewed were qualified to speak to their motivation and experience in obtaining the role. The original sample size I was planning for was 15% of female city managers in Colorado, which is approximately 11 women. So I started with those 11 women. However, throughout the interview process, there was some unsolicited snowball sampling where the women I interviewed shared the names of other female city managers who should be involved because they felt those women's experiences overcoming occupational barriers could really assist me in my research. Therefore, 5 more women were interviewed, which increased my sample size to 16, which was 25% of female city managers in Colorado at the time. I provided some stats on here so you can see on this slide kind of the breakdown of years of experience as well as municipality size. However, the one thing I thought was really interesting is that 10 out of those 16 participants were serving as the first female manager for their municipality. So how I kind of handled the data collection here is I collected data through one-to-one interviews via Zoom, where I asked open-ended, non-leading questions, which would allow the participants to really respond freely and let them guide the conversation rather than controlling the narrative. The interview questions I had really helped to create a framework, but I did truly let the conversation flow where it was going to go. The interview questions were validated by 5 retired female city and county managers who all worked in Colorado. These experts evaluated my interview questions for both content and construct by verifying that the questions were clear, concise, and would truly solicit meaningful responses. After completing all my interviews, I took the Zoom recordings and I uploaded them into Go Transcript, which is a transcription service. Once the files were transcribed, I use a computer-assisted qualitative data analysis tool called Quirkos, which helped with coding. So the coding was important because it allowed me to import the interview transcriptions and start to label statements by participant, and then combining those labels into themes, which emerged, which ultimately created what I called my code book. After the themes were identified, I then compiled my findings and did member checks to ensure data validity. So member checks means that I sent that chapter 4 of my dissertation to all of the participants who I interviewed. They reviewed the data that I obtained and confirmed the validity of the themes and made sure that I didn't introduce my own bias. I didn't misunderstand anything or I didn't misinterpret anything. And I'm happy to report all 16 of the participants did participate in that data validity check. So now let's get into the good part. So we've done all the data. I'm now compiling my findings. So with city management being considered a male-dominated field nationwide, the questions that I asked were about whether the women interviewed ever encountered occupational barriers in their time in their career progression. I think there was a general acknowledgement among the participants that the occupation has really come a long way in terms of seeing more women in the manager role. However, 14 of them were still able to identify examples of occupational barriers they faced. And here are just some of the ones that there's kind of a sampling of what they shared. Many stories about walking into a room and you're the only woman in there. A lot of that second generation bias where it's those subtle nonverbal cues and messages that are delivered from individuals. There was a story about, an assumption of someone who just walked into a room. This person is the only female in the room. It's the city manager, but she was asked to go get the coffee. And so that's just an example of that second generation bias. The need to prove oneself, the need to feel that you need to work that much harder than male counterpoints to be able to do well in this role or prove yourself in this role. That there was that good old boys club or the good old boys network that you're walking into. Some of them actually talked about knowingly being paid less than male counterparts in different director roles as they were growing in their career, or even the city manager role itself. Age bias became up, especially for women who were, you have a female and you're young, and kind of the impact that age actually had and how that defined their experience. Family commitments was brought up a lot, that, often men are not expected to, balance the work and home life, but women have to find that happy medium. But there is a double standard that is applied to men to women, that female city managers are expected to engage or act in a different way than their male counterparts. And last, just generational differences. With more women obtaining the city manager role, it was noted that there's really a shift where men are not only tolerant of women in leadership, but they're playing an active role in ensuring that those avenues are available to them. So while generational differences is not necessarily an occupational barrier now, I think it's noting that perhaps back when many of these women who were 30 plus years were starting, men were not as involved in the advancement of female city managers, but that has definitely changed. When I asked the different participants to speak to the leadership characteristics representative of male and female leaders, I identified that a lot of the terms the participants use to describe male and female leaders were consistent with what researchers have identified as leadership characteristics that are stereotypically associated with each respective gender under, again, that role congruency theory. So on this slide, you see that the terms that are used for male versus female, it shows that alignment, that women are showing more of those communal behaviors, men are showing more of those agnetic behaviors. So female, you see, you've got compassionate, understands employees' needs, effective communication, where men, you've got things like territorial, confident, and stoic. I also asked every participant to then tell me how their direct reports would describe them, as well as how their council or board might describe them. And this slide again shows that the terms that were used reinforce that women are more apt to demonstrate those communal behaviors. Again, you see that compassionate, approachable, community focused, you've got communicative, open-minded. Those are all those communal behaviors that the role congruency theory really points to. Throughout the interview, the participants also spoke to what they felt were skills that effective leaders needed to embody. By completing that cross comparison of the feedback of the list of gender characteristics and the terms used by participants, I identified that these female city managers recognized that their success as a leader within a municipal government was really tied to knowing who they were as fundamental people. They know who they were as people and as leaders. By knowing who they were as leaders and how they wanted to lead an organization, the participants could really elevate and embrace their gender leadership characteristics in a way that allowed them to be the communal leaders they wanted to be without appearing inferior. There was also, of course, the acknowledgement that the city manager is one of the most challenging positions in municipal government. And when I asked them what motivated them to show up every day knowing that this is such a challenging role, what they really spoke to was a variety of things. At first, the conversation was oriented about a project. They were really excited to tell me about a project they were working on, and that was their current motivation. However, as we dove into the conversations further, I noted that supporting staff and creating a healthy work culture, as well as just their general love for the job itself, were the ultimate motivation to show up every day. Some additional themes that emerged in my research were in regards to career progression. First, I started every interview with asking the participants to really tell me about their career progression and what led them to the city manager role. Each participant took a different path. Some worked their way up in a municipal government, and others came in where their first job was the city manager role. However, what I didn't expect was that 7 of the individuals I interviewed didn't even know what city management was until they started in municipal government or took a course that taught about local government structure. There's also the experience in the role. When I asked the participants to share words of wisdom for city managers or their expectations for the role, they spoke about the role being 24/7 and perhaps the need that really has to change because that can be limiting from a family commitment perspective. They also talked about that you have to be a multitasker. That was really a non-negotiable. and that city managers need to know how to navigate the complexity of continuously changing boards and councils. I brought up in the literature review, and that data stayed the same, that there was a need for mentoring and networking. The participants really preserved the sentiment and spoke to the importance of both being able to lean on each other and having that networking, but also ensuring that these females were paving the path forward for that networking and mentorship. For half the participants, mentoring really went two ways. There's the value of receiving and giving it. They also recognized that being a female in a male-dominated field meant that it was their responsibility to continue to ensure that there were more women who were given the space to enter the field of city management and be successful once they obtained the role. We also talked a lot about the future of management. I asked the participants to speak to how the role of city management has changed over the years and what the future of the role could look like. They focused on the importance of recruiting women and targeting recruitment at a younger generations to ensure that they knew that city management was a viable career option. However, I think what was really unique was that all the female participants that they talked about was that representative bureaucracy, that it's about just having more diversity, not just women, but organizations need to be mindful that just simply checking off a box to say there's a woman in that role can actually do more harm than good. While of course we want to increase the number of women serving in city management role, and it's necessary, it really came down to let's just make sure we're always selecting the right person for the job and not allowing demographics or certain characteristics play a role in that decision making. So at the end of that, after finding all my findings, I needed to tie it back to my research questions and what were my findings really saying to my research questions. And what I'll tell you is going into your research, you often think, I know how this is going to turn out. And I was pleasantly surprised that questions 1 through 4 were not as I expected at all. So for the first question, how do women perceive gender as a factor in career progression? The female city managers I interviewed acknowledged that, sure, it's a male-dominated field. However, being a woman in an occupational segregated career had really minimal impact on their career progression. More significantly, though, the participants did not view their gender as something that would benefit or hinder their career progression. For question number 2, what occupational barriers have women had to overcome during their career progression? Though some women who have been in the field perhaps 20 plus years could really speak to that blatant discrimination, gender discrimination, I think all of them could recall some form of gender bias. However, it was much less pronounced and fell more into that second generation bias category. With the field being male dominated, the gender bias was just viewed as something more that female city managers had to prepare themselves for and less of a hindrance in their ability to progress in their career and do their job. For question number 3, what is the relationship between occupational barriers and career progression for women working in local government? Like that gender, the participants just did not view any occupational barriers that they faced as having a significant impact on their career. Although there were comments about the Good Old Boys Club, none of the participants commented about the need for that to dissipate, but rather that it was just a part of the job. Of course, we'd love to see that the Good Old Boys network breaks apart, but knowing it was just something that they're going to need to learn how to navigate. Question 4, how do women describe their experience working in the male-dominated field of city management? With gender and occupational barriers really holding very little weight for the participants, the notion that city management is a male-dominated field also had almost minimal impact, next to no impact. While there was acknowledgement that there is still more men than women serving in the city manager role, the occupational segregation did not impact the participants' experience in obtaining and maintaining this position. Question 5, what are female city managers' motivational triggers that provide them with the fortitude to pursue career advancement in a male-dominated occupation? Since the role is male-dominated, again, it has little impact, as they noted, the motivational triggers were more focused on why they wanted to work in the job. Motivation included things like tangible things, such as completing projects or securing more funding, as well as supporting staff and creating that healthy work culture. However, above all was the motivation to be a high performer in the field and to strive for new heights and continue to enhance and advance the field of city management. And question 6, what are the characteristics of female city managers that aided in their career progression into the city manager? I identified that many of the terms participants used to describe themselves were truly stereotypically associated with their respective gender role under that role congruency theory. For example, when describing typical female leaders, the characteristics participants used were compassionate, empathetic, softer, more finesse, and effective communicators. For male leadership characteristics, terms were used like territorial, confident, and stoic. It was really noted that when female city managers showed more of those male agnetic behaviors, that's where their double standard really became in place, and they were often criticized for showing those behaviors. However, when they showed more of those communal behaviors, perhaps those more employee-centered and in many ways natural behaviors, they felt like they were stronger leaders, they were more connected, and it would allow them to fall into Likhart's participative group system and Blake and Moon's team management grid. So the implications for the study, kind of how does this all tie together? For a municipality to be representative of its population, diversity across all levels must reflect the staff hired, especially in leadership roles. However, with over half the population being women, that really targeted effort should be to increase the city managers from 19% nationwide to 50%. Colorado is truly leading the way, and that's very exciting, with 35% of city managers being women. And the women who are currently in those roles do see value in helping to advance other women. However, this advancement cannot come from putting women in leadership roles, again, simply just to check a box or satisfy a diversity requirement. Female leaders have to be trained and invested in. There needs to be more identified mentorship and networking opportunities where women can connect with female city managers, learn more about what knowledge, skills, and abilities they need to hone in on to be successful in the role. Women also need to be taught that those communal behaviors are okay. The ones that they may naturally maintain are beneficial in management roles, and that investing in people just as much as projects will serve them well. I have to give my shout out to the organizations like the Colorado Municipal League and the Colorado City and County Management Association have always focused on the advancement of women and should continue to do just that and hold webinars like this. The pendulum is swinging to where more women are in the city manager role, and exposure, education, and outreach will only help to continue to see advancement in addressing any occupational barriers that may still exist and inspire women to seek out the city manager role. As with every dissertation, they ask you to do recommendations on further research. And so if I were to do this all over again or encourage you all to do this, here's the areas I would focus on. I would interview male city managers in Colorado, who again have worked the minimum of 7 years, but allow them to share their perspectives. Men play a big role in advancing women. And so I think it would be really interesting to understand what they feel like is their roles and responsibilities in assisting women in obtaining this role. The next recommendation is to look at the age component. I think understanding the age's impact on career progression would be very interesting. Participants who again experienced the barriers often added that age created this whole new level of complexity. And so it'd be interesting to find out what is that age component when it comes to occupational barriers. And lastly, I asked the participants to describe themselves, to tell me how their staff would describe them, how their council would describe them, or board. I think to validate that research data, it would be good to do a 360 where a researcher met with the subordinates and council of the city manager interviewed to see if it really matches up from the role congruency, trait, and behavioral leadership theories. Former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, "All women belong in places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception." This is actually the first sentence of my dissertation, and it feels like the appropriate way to end my slide. So thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to your feedback and questions.
Thank you so much, Miranda. I think Curtis is going to upgrade everybody into the panelist role so that we can do some Q&A. While that's happening, I'm going to kick us off with one quick question, and then we'll see if anybody has anything else. So one of the future recommendations that you had was to look at the impact of age on career progression. This one is very interesting to me because it definitely, I started in my local government role when I was pretty young and worked my way up and through. When we met with you to discuss presenting your presentation, you mentioned that as a younger manager, you have experienced, I've mentioned to you that as a younger manager, I've experienced occupational barriers, and you did as well. Can you explain any of those or share some of those?
Yeah, the age thing was really interesting for me. So, 36, started when I was 33. And that, second generational bias or just that something's in the water feeling was happened a lot. There's plenty of rooms that I walked into where not only was maybe I'm the only woman, but I'm also the youngest and the youngest by 20 years. I was just in a meeting today where I think that I was 30 years younger than everyone in that room. And so there is a moment when you come in and you're the youngest, and there is an automatic kind of assumption or misassumption that I don't have the leadership skills or experience to do this job. And I've got two very specific points. When I was going for this job in Camp Verde, they had already they had put out for the job before, and I didn't apply because one of the criteria was that you needed to be a city manager for 20 years. Well, I'm not old enough to be a city manager for 20 years. So it automatically took me out of the running. And when they had mentioned, why didn't you apply last time? You could have saved us so much heartache. It would have been nice to have you sooner. I shared with them that you really prohibited my ability to do so. When they went back out and they removed that criteria, it gave me the chance to apply. But I've been sharing a lot with leadership here of don't write off people just because they're younger and don't have 20 years in the field. There are talented leaders who are younger. And my only last story, it's one that I repeat a lot around here, is I had a meet and greet here. And the person came up to me and they said, "You're doing great things there. It's so wonderful." And that's incredible because you're only 12, right? And I was like, "Hi, yeah, so funny." But it's comments like that get made a lot of, "And how old are you?" Which I think the undertone of saying that is really an implication of, I'm not sure I entirely trust that you're old enough to do this job.
Yeah, another time I can share my experiences, but I want to see. I was 29 when I had my first manager job. I turned 30 shortly thereafter. So, all right. Anyone else have any questions? I'm not seeing any yet. So I'm going to ask you one more. So mentoring and networking were identified as parts of the lived experience. We know that can be challenging and uncomfortable to ask for help, or even to attend networking alone, especially if you don't know anybody. Do you have recommendations on what we can do to improve mentoring and networking opportunities?
Yeah, I think that of course I knew that, heard that my whole career. And when I saw it in the literature, I thought, that's like fine and dandy. It's wonderful to say it. And it's hard to do it. It's hard to walk up to a stranger and say, "Will you be my mentor?" And so I think as leaders, we have a responsibility to create that bridge to make that happen. And my experience here, example here in Netherlands too, is I have staff members who I want them to grow as leaders. And so I've reached out to my counterparts in other jurisdictions and said, "Hey, I've got a planner. I'd like to connect them to your planner who has been in the role and very established. And I'd love for them to create a mentorship structure." And it's myself and the other leader who have really created the path for this planner, for example, to be successful because we made it happen, where the planner is asking for it. But instead of putting them in kind of that uncomfortable, go find them and awkwardly ask, I think that there is an opportunity to create that for leaders. And I encourage more leaders to look at it that way. Nothing wrong, of course, with going out and just asking someone, "Hey, will you be my mentor?" I think there's tons of power in doing that, but recognizing that that can be uncomfortable, of creating more of those or having more cross collaborations or jurisdictional meetings, or whereas leaders, we're bringing together people so that hopefully the result of that is the mentoring and networking, that while a leader may have started it, it will continue on without that leadership support.
Yeah, I want to add to that. And, I see Joanne Spina is on. When I arrived in Silverton in 2007, I think Joanne was the very first person who called, and my phone rang. I think I'd been in the office for maybe 2 hours, and she called and said, welcome to the region. I'm here down the hill from you. We meet regularly as a regional group for lunch to support one another. This is the date. This is the time. If you need anything, you call me. And I don't know what I would have done, frankly, having not had that group of individuals and not having had Joanne's support all these years. Joanne, I love you. So
Great. So Joanne also, I will tell you, was one of the individuals who supported me with my dissertation. She was the advisor who looked over my questionnaire before I went out. And so I really appreciate that support as well. So it's nice that she's on here too.
yeah. Anybody else have a burning question? Great. All right. Well, we just got another minute or two left here. Miranda, thank you so much. I hope we get to see you back here in Colorado and that you'll come and join us at CCCMA next year. And all of our events that we have going on. We miss you.
I know, I miss you all. Thanks for letting me do this. It's very fun to do. And I was telling Elise earlier, I actually haven't presented this since I defended my dissertation last year. So this was really fun to bring it back around and do it again.
Yeah. And to everybody else for joining, thank you for taking the time. And we look forward to next events. The next event for CWLG will be in March. I don't have the exact date, but we'll be doing our joint East Slope, West Slope National Women's Day luncheon again in March. I believe Broomfield's hosting again, and then Montrose is hosting here on the Western Slope. And we're going to repeat with some changes. And I see a hand up here. Hold on. Oh, Joanne's hand is up. I don't know. Joanne, can you? There you are. Do you want to say something? Would you like to say, dear?
She seems to still be on the attendee side. I don't know if Curtis can bring her over.
Curtis, are you able to bring her over?
Yeah, I just promoted her to a panelist.
Awesome. Joanne, are you able to share your question or thought now?
She's officially in the panelist world.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hi. Well, Miranda, I just wanted to just congratulate you on this presentation. I think it's really important work, and I'm so glad for our profession and for the women on the call and the ones not on the call that you spent the time and energy to do this kind of research. I guess the only thing I wanted to say is ICMA is doing a call for presentations, and I really think you should submit this because I think this on a national level is the kind of conversation that we need to have. And this is a perfect vehicle for it. So I just want to encourage you to submit as a presenter for ICMA next year.
Yeah, people actually asked me that last year, and I was like, I think I need a break. And so now this made me more motivated. So I anticipate I will be doing so.
Well done. I hope to see you there next year then.
Yes.
Thank you for doing it. And thank you, Elise,
Yeah.
for pulling this together. It's a wonderful day. Thank you.
So I'm going to end us on one more note, and Miranda, I think that's an excellent idea as well. Mary Ann shared this with me this summer. So the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers ranked Colorado first regarding the share of women who serve in municipal government at 46.1%. And I think our challenge for all of us that are in the manager role is to figure out how we help those, not just women, but everybody in our organization, but those that have those barriers that we know of, that we've experienced, that we're aware of. How do we help them grow in this profession? How do we help them learn about the opportunities for growth in all local government professions and help keep this profession keep it alive and keep it heading in the direction that it always needs to be going, and looking internal for that succession planning and looking internal to encourage people to consider this pathway. So
Great.
yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you all soon again.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
And you all too.